Welcome to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. We all know that violence is immoral, especially when it comes to gender-based intimate partner violence, which was declared an epidemic in Toronto in July 2023. The World Health Organization, or the WHO, published a study in 2021 that stated that violence against women, particularly intimate partner violence and sexual violence, is a major public health problem. Furthermore, the WHO found that worldwide, nearly 1 in 3, or 30% of women, have been subjected to physical and/or sexual violence by an intimate partner or a non-partner sexual violence, or both. This was also brought to the forefront during COVID lockdowns, and women were locked in with their abusers without having their workplace to go to for a break or protection. And this is just not happening in Toronto or Canada or even North America. It is worldwide. I talk about female empowerment on this show, and it's important to define exactly what that means. Karol Solís Menco has a PhD in political science, is a senior research associate at ICR Colombia, and professor at Researcher and Universidad del Norte, and she's joining us from Barranquilla, Colombia today. Karol, thank you so much for joining us today. This is such an important topic.
Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you for having me. And it is a very important topic.
So let's begin. What are we talking about when we talk about female empowerment?
Well, I really appreciate that question because how I'd like to explain it is that there's usually a mismatch in between how we sometimes describe a concept or we formally describe it and then how we get to see it applied. And female empowerment has to do with advancing in gender equality and the tools to do it, including giving access to more opportunities and access to power to women. And that access implies a lot of things, or you would ask, like, what power, what kind of power, right? So it's not just power to have the ability to choose whatever they want their life to look like, but also the ability to make choices about how their families can look, how their sexual life can look, how their education can look, or how their professional path can look. So it's powered in different spheres of life, I would say. Unfortunately, however, how we get to see it sometimes is that there has been sold an idea that empowerment has to do with almost being Wonder Woman. The idea that now women have to do like the house chores, like conforming to a stereotypical roles, and that on top of that, they will get to do something else with their life, including educating themselves, having a professional path, but that they will do all of that on top of conforming to stereotypical things that are expected from them. So I would say that's the mismatch in between thinking about female empowerment and how there's like this commercialized idea that now we have to be pretty professionals and still have or conform to the stereotypical family type. That's something I would like to say about it. And then on the other end, female empowerment has a lot to do with how we understand our rights. It has to do how much we know about our rights and the ones that we don't have, whether or not we are committed to still fight for them.
So, okay, let's talk about what this topic is about, which is when we talk about gender-based violence, what exactly are we referring to?
Well, gender-based violence has to do with the idea that there are forms of violence that disproportionately affect women. So a normal misconception is that it only has to do with women, even though we use it or it was created to refer to a specific forms of violence to women. It can also refer to men in a specific forms of violence that disproportionately affect them. So in the case for women, you were mentioning at the very beginning the pandemic, and you were mentioning data points about Canada. Well, it also happens in my country, of course, and all over the world.
Karol, hold on to that thought. Hold on to that thought. We've got to go to commercial break, but we will be right back with more of the gender-based violence. Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. On today's episode, we're discussing female empowerment and gender-based violence. And Karol, before we went to commercial break, we were talking about women during COVID lockdowns.
Yes, Elizabeth. So during the pandemic, we were able to witness how gender-based violence can affect women. And why do I say that? For instance, in my country during 2020, out of 110,000 cases of allegations of domestic violence that were reported to the prosecutor's office, more than 75%, more than 80,000 came from women, for example. That is a clear example of gender-based violence. Take, for instance, sexual harassment or something that we as women get to experience in our everyday life, is street harassment. The idea that there are forms of violence that are specifically directed to or disproportionately, it's a better word, disproportionately affect women. It's what is at the center or at the core of the notion or of the concept of gender-based violence.
So I want to take it to the next level right now because I want to talk about financial independence. And I know it's crucial to prevent gender-based violence. Let's talk about that right now, just so that people can understand why finance is important.
One of the core notions about female empowerment, or one of the things we talk about when we talk about female empowerment, has to do with how women can be independent, and that includes financial independence. One of the reasons why is because research has shown that it is extremely hard for women that are economically dependent on their partners, to remove themselves from circles of violence or from contexts of violence. Imagine a woman who is a housewife and that has suffered from domestic violence. If they don't have the financial means to remove themselves from that situation, it is unlikely that they will be able to do so. So financial independence has everything to do with the possibility for some women to even be able to take the decision to remove themselves from a violent situation that they are experiencing at home.
You know, that's one of the reasons why I'm a strong believer in financial literacy. And that's one of the reasons why I've often said, no matter what kind of a relationship you're in, whether it's a good relationship or a bad relationship, make sure you have your own bank account or your own means of money as well. Because you never know when things will go bad. You never know when things will turn, and you never know when you're going to need that money to support yourself.
Absolutely. It's something that I love about the concept of female empowerment is the idea that even if you have a partner, you're still an individual and you need to have your own life project. You need to have your own finances. You need to still be able to take financially independent decisions. And that, again, I want to repeat, has everything to do with the possibility for some women to remove themselves from circles of violence. Because if you don't have the means to do so, especially if you have kids, or put on that picture kids, right?
Yeah.
And how you want a stable life for them, then you will continue to sacrifice your well-being and sometimes, unfortunately, your whole life just because you don't have the means to do something different or to picture a different life.
I want to talk about gender stereotypes right now because a lot of people think, oh, it's not a big deal. You know, stereotypes don't hurt anyone. Let's talk about how gender stereotypes play a role in all of this.
Well, gender stereotypes, if you would describe it somehow, you would say they are like ideas that people have about how something should look like. So for women, it is the ideas around how we should look like, how we should behave, how we should talk, and how our whole life system should look like. And they affect us disproportionately because they create like a bubble of expectations around us. They dictate how we perceive we have opportunities to live our life And especially they determine how free we feel to make choices outside of those, let's call them boxes, that are put into our imaginary, into our imagination, or into our belief systems of what things are desirable to us, stereotypical. And we'll maybe should discuss about the Barbie movie later, and how it pictures like the stereotypical Barbie and how she looks like, and whether or not we imagine ourselves outside the boundaries of stereotypes, of
Karol?
those rules that tell us.
Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. Today's episode, we're discussing female empowerment and gender-based violence. Now, Karol, before we went to break, you were talking about stereotypes for women, and you also mentioned the Barbie movie, which we will talk about. But first, I still want to stay with stereotypes. How do gender stereotypes affect men?
Well, I think that's a great question, because sometimes when we talk about female empowerment, then we just think about how the world look for women. But in order for us to close the gender gap, we need to involve men in these conversations. And one important thing is to have conversations about how things such as stereotypes also affect them. I'm going to share with you a story. Just yesterday, actually, I was watching the Barbie movie. And right when I came out of the movies with my best friend, and I've known her since we were 4, we looked at each other and she was like, you know what? By our age, we're 33, both of us, our moms already were like our moms, and we don't have kids. And for us, that's like a big thing here, right? You're 30, you don't have kids, you're expected to have kids or to have a family, or if you don't have a family, to have a stable relationship by the age of 30. For men, how that looks like is that they are expected to be building this very specific life path, to be stable and to be providers, and that they have to be strong, and that they cannot show their emotions, and that also come at the cost of their own health, mental health, right? So stereotypes affect men in extreme ways, because they also mandate very specific ways of being, and boxes out of which they cannot conceive their lives.
You know, it's interesting. You talk about stereotypes for women and for men. Life has changed so much and we've evolved so much, yet none of the stereotypes have. They still are, 1950s, 1930s, or whatever other time there was. The man's a provider and the woman is the homemaker. We've got to move out of that, and we've got to get beyond this so that, this epidemic is curtailed and stopped.
Absolutely. It is incredible. And one of the reasons why it happens, what you're mentioning, we seem to be advancing, but we're still bound by these stereotypes that seem to be attached to like a century before or 2 centuries before. And I believe one of the reasons why, and that's why I love your previous question, it's because men or women are not having those conversations at the same time. Research also shown how for women, we have like changed our, let's call it, mental structure a little bit faster than men. We have allowed ourselves to have these conversations and to question more the lives we live and the opportunities we have. But men are not creating, at least equally fast, those spaces for those conversations to be had among them. There are efforts, there are tons of efforts. And for example, and you mentioned housemaker, there's a program, a European program, and now in my country it's getting applied. It's called Men in Care, for example. It also links to the pandemic and how women disproportionately have to take care of house chores and responsibilities way more than men. In my country, for example, for every 3 hours that men spend in house responsibilities or house tasks, women spend almost 8. And we really have allowed ourselves to have these conversations and start questioning, but men have to continue to create those spaces for them. They have started, but they are going at a slowest pace.
So I want to go back to Barbie, because I just saw it as well. Everyone's talking about the movie. Everyone's talking about women in the boardroom. But what I want to know is your take on it, considering what we've discussed so far.
Well, there are, to me, and it honestly, it strikes me how sometimes, and I follow Twitter a lot, so I've seen some discussions of men thinking it is like a world for women, and I sometimes kind of believe like we're seeing, did we watch the same movie? Because to me, the message, the central message that the movie is given, it's it is depicting both worlds, a world that is fully ruled by women and how it is totally unfair to men, versus the idea of how a world fully ruled by men, it's totally unfair to women. And at the end, it just sends the message that each individual can choose a life path for themselves, has to think of themselves as individuals and what they want to do and be and live outside of what expectations someone else's or society has about them, and how we can build a more equal world.
Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. On today's episode, we're discussing female empowerment and gender-based violence. Now, Karol, when we think about female empowerment, our minds tend to go to the idea of female boss, entrepreneur, or the businesswoman, somebody in the boardroom. But this can seem exclusionary, especially to other forms of being, especially women who are in more traditional roles, someone that is, at home taking care of her home and the children, or even women who don't have access to education in a traditional system. How do we deal with this?
You're totally right, Elizabeth. And that is why I always put at the center of female empowerment the right to choose. What we want when we talk about empowering women is that they know we have the right to choose what we want our life to look like outside gender stereotypes that we have discussed before. And that if we conform to things that are traditionally expected from us, that is still a choice that we make, and that we make that choice knowing that we could do something else if we wanted to, that there are different life paths that we can follow, that if we want to be a housewife, we do it because we chose it, because we consider it's a good balance with how we deal with family, with things that matter to us, but that you have the right to do something different. And that is why I always emphasize female empowerment has not really much to do with being Wonder Woman and doing 100 different things in the perfect way and just being very, very tired at the end of the day because of it. But it has to do everything with having rights, with being able to exercise those rights, and be able to exercise the core right of all of the other ones, which is the right to choose whatever we want to do with our bodies, with our professional path, and with our more intimate life.
So we have 2 minutes left. I want to talk about how we can involve men in these conversations to get to that next level.
I think that one thing we need to start doing is creating safe spaces for men and women to exchange. We usually talk about safe spaces for women to share, but when we think about it, and especially I work in spaces in which, and I defend the idea that as women, we need specific spaces in which only we get to talk with ourselves and with other women to freely speak. But I also believe that we need to start creating spaces in which we can have these conversations with men so that they can listen to our experiences without questioning them, but with the desire to learn from them and the willingness to change their attitudes and the way they behave sometimes. But also, we as women need to be willing to understand where those behaviors are coming from and to hear their experiences, and be more open to having those spaces in which we exchange and try to understand each other in terms of why we do the things we do and how we can do them differently. I would say that that's the most important thing, that we need to start having these conversations together in safe spaces for both men and women, and that men also, and especially, need to start creating their own spaces to rethink masculinity and what masculine looks like and what masculine and how masculine men behave, right?
Mhm.
So there's a whole notion about new masculinities, and I think that's a great path that men are also like walking.
Thank you so much for your insights. I know that this episode will help a lot of women. Good to see you today.
Thank you, Elizabeth, very much.
This epidemic needs to stop. Worldwide, almost 1/3 or 27% of women aged 15 to 49 years who have been in a relationship report that they have been subjected to some form of physical and or sexual violence by their intimate partner. Think about your mother, your sister, daughter, girlfriends. A lot of women are trapped and need to access the safe supports in their communities. As Toronto's Mayor Olivia Chow stated, we need to give hope to women and children that are experiencing violence now. And one way to give hope is to say that they can recover. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski, and I'm here to empower you and make frugality fashionable. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.